To Kill a Mockingbird, Reader's Digest version, Chapter 6, Part 1. It was Jim's turn to cry. His face was streaked with angry tears as we made our way through the crowd. At the corner of the square, we found Atticus waiting, his impassive self again. "It ain't right, Atticus," said Jim. "No, son, it's not right." And Alexandra was waiting up at home. "I'm sorry, brother," she said. I had never heard her call Atticus brother before. She indicated Jim. "Is he all right?" "He'll be so presently. It was a little too strong for him." Atticus sighed. "I'm going to bed. If I don't wake up in the morning, don't call me." "I didn't think it wise to let them. This is their home, sister," said Atticus. "We've made it this way for them. It's just as much Macomb County as missionary teas." "Atticus," and Alexandra's eyes were anxious. "You are the last person I thought would turn bitter over this." "I'm not bitter, just tired. I'm going to bed." "Atticus," said Jim bleakly. He turned in the doorway. "What, son?" "How could they do it? How could they?" "I don't know, but they've done it before, and they'll do it again, and when they do, it seems that only children weep. Good night." But things are always better in the morning. Atticus rose at his usual ungodly hour and was in the living room behind the Mobile register when we stumbled in. Jim's face posed his question. "We're not through yet," Atticus reassured him as we went to the dining room. "There'll be an appeal, you can count on that." "Gracious alive, Cal, what's all this?" He was staring at his plate. Cal said, "Tom Robinson's daddy sent you along this chicken." "You tell him I'm proud to get it, but they don't have chicken for breakfast at the White House." "What are these?" "Rolls. Estelle down at the hotel sent them." Atticus looked up at her, puzzled, and she said, "You'd better step out here and see what's in the kitchen, Mr. Finch." We followed him. The kitchen table was loaded with salt pork, tomatoes, pig knuckles, scuppernongs. Cal said, "They all appreciate what you did, Mr. Finch." Atticus's eyes filled with tears. He did not speak for a moment. "Tell them I'm very grateful," he said, "but they must never do this again. Times are too hard." He left the kitchen, excused himself to Aunt Alexandra, put on his hat, and went to town. We heard Dill step in the hallway, so Calpurnia left Atticus's uneaten breakfast on the table. Between bites, Dill told us of Miss Rachel's reaction to last night. If a man like Atticus Finch wants to butt his head against a stone wall, it's his head. When we went to the front porch, Miss Stephanie Crawford was on the sidewalk busy telling everything to Miss Maudie Atkinson and another neighbor, Mr. Avery. Miss Maudie yelled for us to come over. "Jim Finch, I called to find if you and your colleagues can eat some cake. Got up at 5 to make it. Excuse us, Stephanie." As we ate, we sensed that this was Miss Maudie's way of saying that, as far as she was concerned, nothing had changed. She sat quietly watching us. Suddenly, she spoke. "Don't fret, Jim. There are some men in this world who were born to do our unpleasant jobs for us. Your father's one of them." "Oh," said Jim. "Well." He was staring at his half-eaten cake. "I always thought Macomb folks were the best folks in the world." "We're the safest folks in the world," said Miss Maudie. "We're so rarely called on to be Christians, but when we are, we've got men like Atticus to go for us." "Wish the rest of the county thought that," Jim said. "You'd be surprised how many of us do." "Who?" Jim's voice rose. "Who in this town did one thing to help Tom Robinson? Just who?" "His colored friends, and people like us, people like Judge Taylor, like Heck Tate. Jim, did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor naming Atticus to defend that boy was no accident?" This was a thought. Court-appointed defenses were usually given to Maxwell Green, Macomb's latest addition to the bar, who needed the experience. "You think about that," Miss Maudie was saying. "I was sitting on the porch last night waiting for you all to come down the sidewalk, and as I waited, I thought, Atticus Finch can't win. And he's the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long in a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step. It's just a baby step, but it's a step. We went down Miss Maudie's new steps and found Miss Rachel had joined Miss Stephanie Crawford on the sidewalk. When we came up, Miss Stephanie was trembling with excitement, and Miss Rachel caught Dill's shoulder. "You get on in the backyard and stay there," she said. "There's danger a-comin'." "'Smatter?" I asked. "Ain't you heard yet? It's all over town." And Alexandra came to the door and called us, but she was too late. It was Miss Stephanie's pleasure to tell us. This morning, Mr. Bob Ewell stopped Atticus on the post office corner, spat in his face, and told him he'd get him if it took the rest of his life. "I wish Bob Ewell wouldn't chew tobacco," was all Atticus said about it. According to Miss Stephanie Crawford, Atticus didn't bat an eye when Bob Ewell spat on him and threatened to kill him. He just took out his handkerchief and wiped his face and let Mr. Ewell call him names wild horses could not bring her to repeat. Mr. Ewell then inquired, "Too proud to fight?" And Atticus said, "No, too old," put his hands in his pockets, and strolled on. Miss Stephanie said you had to hand it to Atticus Finch. He could be right dry sometimes. Jim and I didn't think it entertaining. We thought Atticus ought to carry a gun. We told him so, and he said nonsense. But when he noticed us dragging around the neighborhood, not eating, taking little interest in our normal pursuits, Atticus discovered how deeply frightened we were. He said to Jim one evening, "What's bothering you, son?" Jim came to the point. "Mr. Ewell, we're scared for you. When a man says he's going to get you, looks like he means it." "He meant it when he said it," said Atticus. "Jim, see if you can stand in Bob Ewell's shoes a minute. I destroyed his last shred of credibility at that trial. The man had to have some kind of comeback, take it out on somebody, his kind always does. If spitting in my face and threatening me saved Mayella one extra beating, that's something I'll gladly take. You understand?" Jim nodded. "We don't have anything to fear from Bob Ewell," Atticus said. "He got it all out of his system that morning." After that, we were not afraid. Summer was melting away, and we made the most of it. Atticus assured us that nothing would happen to Tom Robinson until the higher court reviewed his case, and that Tom had a good chance of going free, or at least of having a new trial. He was at Infield Prison Farm, 70 miles away in Chester County. "If he loses his appeal," I asked one evening, "what'll happen?" "He'll go to the chair unless the governor commutes his sentence. But don't worry yet, Scout. We've got a good chance." Jim was reading Popular Mechanics. He looked up. "It ain't right. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't take anybody's life." "You know rape's a capital offense in Alabama," said Atticus. "Yes, sir, but the jury didn't have to give him death. They could have gave him 20 years. "Given," said Atticus. Tom's colored, Jim. No jury in this part of the world's going to say, "We think you're guilty, but not very," on a charge like that. It was either straight acquittal or nothing. "Then it all goes back to the jury. We ought to do away with juries." Atticus couldn't help smiling. "You're rather hard on us, son. I think maybe there might be a better way. Change the law so that only judges have the power of fixing the penalty in capital cases." This was not good enough for Jim. "No, sir, they ought to do away with juries. He wasn't guilty, and they said he was." "If 12 boys like you had been on that jury, son, Tom would be a free man," said Atticus. "So far, nothing in your life has interfered with your reasoning process, but in our courts, when it's a white man's word against a black man's, the white man always wins. They're ugly, but those are the facts of life." "You just can't convict a man on evidence like that. You can't." "Jim," said Atticus, "as you grow older, you'll often see white men cheat black men. But let me tell you something, and don't you forget it. Whenever a white man does that to a black one, no matter how rich he is, how fine a family he comes from, that white man is trash." He went on, speaking now more to himself than to us. "There was one thing about that jury, though, that made me think, well, this may be the shadow of a beginning. They took a few hours. Usually it takes them just a few minutes." And this time, he looked down at us. There was one fellow who took considerable wearing down. In the beginning, he was raring for an outright acquittal. Who? Jim was astonished. Atticus's eyes twinkled. It's not for me to say, but I'll tell you this much. He was one of your friends from Old Sarum. One of the Cunninghams? Jim yelped. Golly Moses, 1 minute they're trying to kill him, and the next they're trying to turn him loose. Atticus said once you earned the Cunninghams' respect, they were for you, tooth and nail. He said he had a feeling, nothing more than a suspicion, that when they left the jail that night, with considerable respect for the Finches. Later that night, Jim said to me, Scout, why can't folks just get along with each other? He paused. I think I'm beginning to understand something. I think I'm beginning to understand why Boo Radley stayed shut up in the house all this time. It's because he wants to stay inside.